So the panel is focused around the topic of, how to create and hire diversity into teams, or to hire more diversity into teams, but also what is the competitive advantage of diverse teams. So continuing a little bit on what we have heard. So in a panelist, and I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. Jennifer Barnes, first here, is the Vice President of One Energy Renewables. She leads the advancement of human capital and operational goals of the company. She has 2 decades of senior leadership experience, and she's very engaged from the conversation yesterday night. I can see that she's very passionate and knowledgeable on the topic of diversity. Paul Chimes, I have still problems pronouncing his name. So Paul serves as the Chief Human Resource Officer at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. So some of the questions that were asked about what we can do, in fact, to perhaps introduce more diversity, I'm sure that he's an expert on that. He has, in fact, 25 years of experience in the field of leadership organization, development and human resource strategy, and change efforts. So actually, Paul yesterday was very keen to remind me that what he's specialized in is applying practices, not writing policies, that perhaps writing policies have the tendency to be seen as counterproductive to some extent. Next, Tom Gallant. He works at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, LBNL, so in the physical science area. So he serves as the co-chair of the Lambda Alliance Employee Activity Association, which is an LGBT group focused on improving the life and environment for everyone, so and promoting an inclusive and welcoming atmosphere. He's also involved in developing a set of resources and best practices for diversity and inclusion. And of course, George Langford has already been introduced as the, Dean of Syracuse University College of Arts and Science, and chair of the Minority Affairs Committee of the American Society for Cell Biology. So, we wanted to organize this panel a little bit differently. So we have actually a preset of questions, it turned to, it came to our attention, let's say, that perhaps not everybody will feel inclined to ask questions. So we opened a poll and a survey and try to collate all the answers to be sure that everybody has a voice, even the shy people who wanted to ask questions that would not otherwise. So that's the process. So I have a few questions, first of all, but just to let you know, we had 20+ questions, and there were overlapping themes. And this is what I'm going to ask now. And as a very first question, which is something which is very much along what Gordon has asked, which is what practical step can be taken to address diversity balance in team at hiring, and that could be both in private sector or of course university or labs. So perhaps Paul, you wanted to say something already earlier on. Yes. Like me in my pocket, or? Okay.
of their primary. And so that works throughout our hiring process. Our job descriptions are written in gender neutral language. That was a change. We started seeing more women applying just based on that. And then the criteria set by which all evaluation and decision making will be set. And the first year out with that process, we went to 20% of female hires. This year, we're on target for 45%. And it's just been carefully managing the decision-making process to start with to really block the naturally quick thinking or in labeling people.
So perhaps, yeah.
That's relevant to hear. And yes, thank you all so much for having us up here. My company, we develop solar projects all over the country. Is that better? Oh, it wasn't on. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
So coming from the energy industry has fewer women in it than technology even, which is always getting a bad reputation. They deservedly so for not doing a good job of integrating women and developing them properly. So the energy industry has even fewer. And my current company is almost 50-50 men and women, and I have never had a job where I've been nearly 50-50. There's actually 2 of us on the board, and we're getting ready to hire a third. So one of the things that has worked exceptionally well for us is redoing our job descriptions, and I would encourage people here to really, if this is something that you want to do, that's a really great place to start. There are words that are better to not use if you want to attract a woman to a job. So I would encourage that. If you don't have something as stringent and well laid out as what Slack does, I would at least encourage you guys to separate out your interviews so that you're not interviewing with a bank of people, but actually giving the interviewee time to interview with individuals. If you are in a position where you're passing out resumes, I would encourage people to consider removing the names and the locations of where these applicants are coming from. That'll help with all kinds of implicit bias. So those are just a few easy to do things that could at least get you started.
I can add, the first 2 searches we did using our decision-making process was for our Panofsky Fellowship, which is an international competition, and a faculty member. They both went to women. And the Panofsky, 4 of the 5 finalists were diverse. And what was interesting is the scientists involved in the selection process said, yeah, this slowed us down and that was annoying, but we feel better with the decision we made coming out the back end. So it was very reaffirming in that sense.
And I would tack on to that, if you are in a position to be interviewing and hiring, so you are handed a handful of candidates, right? Or, and it doesn't look diverse enough to you, it's not what you want, send them back to HR. Whatever, somebody in your group or your organization or your school is handing these to you. Send them back, start the interview process over. If one of those people makes it in to that second round, great. But this is something that I've seen happen a number of times, and if we hadn't have sent that round of resumes back, we wouldn't have ended up hiring the best candidate who happened to be diverse, who happened to be a woman. So it's worth it.
So Tom, would you tell us a bit more about how it's handled in Berkeley?
So in Berkeley, I'm not going to say we do it perfectly. I think we need to adapt a little bit more of Slack's model. But what I see is the selling of the laboratory to these diverse groups is not done well enough. And it's something that we're trying to change. So the targeting the position solicitation to diverse groups, not to have a specific recruitment in mind, but to increase the ability for diverse groups to apply for the positions, has been helping. And what we're trying to do now is make it something that is more desirable for our hiring managers to go out and do that. A lot of these institutions or these organizations, women engineers, African American scientist groups, they will sometimes charge for the position posting. So what we're trying to do is get the institution to just blindly cover the cost so that it's not the hiring manager's decision to do that. And that's a challenge we're trying to tackle right now. The blind resumes where you don't have the personal information, that is a very important step to do, because implicit bias is very hard to correct and combat. But bias awareness training is a great first step for that, and something that is readily available out on the web. We'll share a link to our document of awareness training that is just a 20-minute video to watch that will get you thinking in the right direction. If you're a hiring manager, I really recommend doing that, because if you're aware of it, you can start combating that. And those are just a couple of things for right now.
So I wonder at this point if there would be a follow-up question on this theme from the audience. Yes. Yes. Oh, please.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I just wanted to add a couple of points, and that is that, again, I think it's important to think about this on an institutional level. So, it really needs to come from the president or chancellor down to the provost and the dean and to the faculty. And, the other thing that has to happen is you have to change the incentives to faculty for making these kinds of decisions. So, you need to think about tenure and promotion, for example. How do you really reward departments and individual faculty for making these kinds of changes, for understanding that diversity matters and that diversity brings additional qualities to the department and to the institution. So you really do have to look at it from this broad perspective of the entire institutional structure.
Yeah. So any comments or questions? Why don't we take one follow-up there? Follow-up questions, right? Yes.
I just had a very small technical question. Several of you have mentioned the idea of non-binding resumes. I just wonder if it was something that could reasonably be done, because one of the most important qualifying factors in the resume is a list of publications. So you can, of course, always infer from the publications who the person is. I have met the person at a conference and so on. So I wonder if there's any insight on how to deal with that.
So at SLAC, we're lucky enough to be associated with Stanford, and they have the Clayman Institute for Gender Research there, which is where we've taken a lot of our lead from practices. And their process by which you would even have the criteria defined up front by which you even evaluate the resume kind of helps remove that need to take the name off if you're really careful in how you do that. So you're just making sure that any evaluation is done against agreed-to criteria up front, and you make sure you stick to it. So in that case, for us, we don't remove names from resumes, and it's working for us. But you really have to adhere to the process. It takes some discipline, and people naturally want to push through it more quickly, and we have to slow them up to do it.
So actually this kind of diversity awareness for hiring managers, is that what you are advocating, that we need to be constantly reminded? And
at the start of every search, the hiring manager and the selection panel all get a mini training or briefing on the process and how it works, what inherent bias is, and how we are taking steps to block it.
Is it, George, perhaps also just following on this? So he is also in your field of science, for example, not meeting with the individuals and blocking the name, something which is actually possible because, I also thought that, okay, for me at the end, I need to hire someone. I need to see how the person express themselves, present, and everything. There's many different skills. But is it something that is possible also? Do you have practical guidelines for this particular point on, can we really block the name essentially and anonymize things? Because at some point in science, you need a physical presence.
Right, and I think it's not possible, at least in the way we do searches now. I think we have to find other ways to deal with it because, as the person who asked the question mentioned, you have to review the publications and the track record of that individual. So it's a little bit more difficult to make it anonymous, at least in the academic community. But, if you can make individuals aware that are biases, then it sounds like it is possible to actually achieve the outcome that you're looking for. And just to comment on that, it may not be possible to maintain, you obviously have to interview them at some point, so you're going to know who they are at some point. But as a first pass for reviewing resumes and finding people with qualifications, it helps to be able to just ignore the biases and the names and everything to start, and then you have a good candidate pool to work from with people with qualifications and whatnot. And then you have all the data available. So first pass.
As an example, female faculty tend to get asked to provide more data on their teaching history and how well they do with the groups over the men. So we just say, you know what, if you're going to ask for the women, you need to ask for the men too. So you keep the bar at the same level for everyone. You're not raising the bar for anyone. You're keeping the bar at the same level for everyone throughout the process.
Yeah, so please. Please.
So I think a couple of you mentioned like keywords or words that you shouldn't use in the job description. What the effect may have, and I'm just curious what some of those words are.
It's called agentic and communal language. Agentic is more masculine, taking agency, meaning taking action. The communal is more concerned with the social aspects. So women tend to get labeled more for being the good communicator, the good team player, creating harmony. Men, it's about getting things done. So you want to make sure your job description is reflective of both kinds of language. You want someone who gets it done, but also someone who can develop other people. So you make sure you're building out job descriptions that are attractive to men or women. And then again, you measure both against the same set of criteria.
So I actually forgot to mention that from the agenda entry today, there is a bunch of reference and documents that we have uploaded. And we will ask our panelists to even add more information for people who want to, consult a little bit more after the panel. And we also will ask them to kindly write the answers to questions after the panel. So we have also a written document. Yes, perhaps a quick one, and then I'll have to go through my list.
Should we include gender as an input? Should it be considered? And usual immediate answer is no. But we know that this answer is wrong because of many correlations. The output, the hiring efficiency would be not equal. So the only way to make it flat, to make no preference according to gender, is to put gender as an explicit feature and enforce that. But this is limited. So how to resolve this
So bias is not going anywhere. It's going to be there. It's always going to be there. We're not going to root it out of our brain. The idea is how do we block it when it's in play? What we're doing is we have not put any quotas on hiring women or underrepresented peoples. We haven't done that at all. We just said we're going to make the best decision possible by following our processes. And what we try to do is make sure there's adequate representation in the pool of people from which we're choosing. That's the only place we kind of put some numbers. We want to make sure we have 30% of women in the pool, right? And we work hard to make sure we get adequate representation in those talent pools. And then we just use our process to make the best decision.
So yes, quickly, please.
So, 4 members of panel are advocating diversity. Is it good diversity?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
More aggressive. As mentioned, that the diversity brings better quality of the outcome of the group.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand, so I will take it as a comment and move to our next. Sorry, I have to skip and move on the list of questions. Then you can come back to more questions. So one of the things is moving away from hiring. One of the questions that came from our poll was that diversity hiring is one step to ensure a balanced workplace, and you have discussed about this. But what are the best practices and guidelines for fostering an inclusive and welcoming workplace, and actually to retain also the diversity, since we also heard from the talk that, you know, the retaining has some difficulty when you feel like the one person in the crowd. So what are the best practices? Yeah, Tom, please.
So at Berkeley Laboratory, we have what are called employee resource groups. And these are groups of people that are coming together for common goals. So we have the African American Employee Resource Group, the Lambda Alliance Employee Resource Group, All Access for People with Disabilities Resource Group, and there's another one that's escaping me at the moment. But their goals are to put in place practices that are furthering retention, advancement, and equality for these groups and everybody at the laboratory. And what we see is the active groups, the ones that are really out there doing things, are affecting real change at the laboratory. And they're being supported by management. And new hires, new staff are seeing this as they come in. The management, being the laboratory director, hosted a brown bag to allow these groups to speak. The webpage for our institution proudly has it listed up on the page for people, prospective employees, to look and see about these things. They encourage new groups to be formed, and the institution actually provides funds at a budget request for these groups to support them to meet their goals. Getting people in and letting them to see these things is a great way for them to feel that they will be represented, that they have a voice, that they are counted. I think Slack has similar groups, and Paul can probably speak more about what they do.
We do have a couple of groups in place that are helping with the larger education engagement of the community. We've also put in place the same decision-making processes in all of our people processes. So when it comes to performance reviews and evaluation, when it comes to talent assessment and talent planning, when it comes to promotions, when it comes to making merit decisions, we have those gates in place. But it started with providing all kinds of data that showed where bias was actually playing out in our lab. We showed the data that proved that women were being paid less than their white male counterparts who had the same levels of experience and education, right? We gave them that data. We spent literally over 300 hours of analysis and looking through all of our performance reviews to show that women and underrepresented people were held to a higher level of accountability and given more critical feedback than their white males. Right? So we're able to show where it actually plays out to increase the awareness in the lab and then say, what are we going to do about it? How do we change our decision-making throughout to do that? We've since leveled out compensation for men and women. We've leveled out underrepresented peoples and women being put into development programs, and we've reversed our trend of them leaving at higher rates just by paying attention to those details and providing lots and lots of data to show where bias plays out in our culture and decision-making.
We've done something very similar. It's not probably at the scale as you have done, but one of the changes that we made in the last couple of years is around the review process. And you know, so many companies and groups are moving away from just a single annual review, and moving away, we've found, and other studies have backed this up, that moving away from a single annual review is fantastic for increasing retention of diverse groups, because you're giving feedback throughout the year, you're allowing opportunities for improvement, and you're not just getting to that end of the year review, which probably everyone in this room has had one of those at least, where you've done something really crappy right at the end, and that's what's remembered in your review. So we reworded all the language in our reviews, and we do regular check-ins now, and kind of going back to some of the rewarding questions, looking at not talking about your communication skills and how people get along with other people, but talking about results and metrics and deliverables. And part of that success is really incumbent upon training the managers to help set good goals and check in. And you know, these are tangible things that if you are hiring or if you are managing individuals that you can start doing. There's millions more, but there's a huge difference. And the first time that we changed, that we started the process, the new review process, there was not a single woman in our company who didn't come and say, thank you. It was noticeable. So.
Why don't you, yeah, please, someone pass the microphone. Just quick burning question, I guess. Yeah. That was a no. It was a no.
So, what I hear is that it's the policies that make these things happen. And if I understand correctly, what we would call the user group, so the people who are not defining the policies are the ones who are creating sustainable work to make change, right? Now, what I see in Europe is that we don't have these voices. You have a tradition in the U.S. of having diverse voices that people actually hear, right? In Europe, it's not like that. We don't have this tradition. So my question is, how could we make this happen? Do you need these voices? Do we foster these voices before management decides to change procedures, or how did it happen for you?
So I'm going to go back to what comment Jerome mentioned about me when I started. I really like to talk about practices over policies. And there's actually some good research that says when you put a policy in place to make people do something, they tend to move away from it. Right? It drives a deeper wedge into the practice. Whereas the practice is here's the best ways to go about doing something, and for us it's been about let's make better decisions. And it took about 18 to 20 months of monthly discussions with our senior team and lots and lots and lots of data and research to get them to say, oh my gosh, we need to go do this, and to create champions out of them to go back into their own organizations and do it. And it was a lengthy process to get there, but I think it really paid off, because once that happened, then we got everyone involved and we started making some improvements pretty quickly. I think it's a lot easier, being the white privileged guy up here. It's actually easier for me to get up and talk and say those things with our senior team. than if a woman or a person of color were to do it, because it looks like, initially, it looks like there's some self-interest involved. I don't know if George can, right? So I've been stunned this is the first time I've worked this issue in my career. I've been stunned by the level of attention I'll get as the white man doing it. And so my challenge to all white men is, it's on us to really make the changes happen here.
Yeah. So I actually thought when I heard about the, reassessing the goals and having regular discussion with people, I thought of it more as a practice rather than a policy myself, which is like, on an everyday or every year basis, think about regular feedback, because also as a manager, if you reassess the goals that you set for people, you can compare across as well. Do I have the same goals for this person and this person, or the same kind of level of goals? If you think indeed only once a year, as someone mentioned, I think Jennifer mentioned, it's like the bad things that are those that you remember rather than the incremental. So I saw this as a practice. I think that would be a good practice that any supervisor can probably apply, even whether or not there is a policy.
One thing I would add, and this is listed on some of the resources that are on the web page for the roundtable here. If any of you are familiar with a woman by the name of Iris Bonet, she is, I'm sure you are. She's amazing. She leads up the gender studies. I can't remember. I pull it up here, but anyway, she's from, at Harvard at the Kennedy School, and she has become a leader in the entire world, international platform, on telling us and showing us how to actually implement gender diversity and why it works and how to do it. And you can buy her book and you can read it, or you can go online and you can actually just start implementing some of these things. She's one of only 20 women, I believe, who are regularly invited to Davos. So what I like about what she's done is she's done a really good job of taking research and statistics and then putting them into action and sharing them.
So I see Federico has a burning question.
I just wanted to pick up 2 points which have been mentioned to improve the men practice and not policy, which I think is a very good point, and also about gender diversity. And I would like just to relate my own experience. In 2015, the female researchers at CERN were less than 15% of the scientific engineering staff. And at that time, I started a new project with a new step in my career. So I decided to try to address this because I had to make few hires. So the way I tried to address it was to focus on things unconscious bias. Because it is a fact that I have a long experience at CERN, but I've seen that all the hiring procedure at CERN is very fair. If a talented woman gets into the hiring procedure, in good chance she's hired. The point is that they don't get there. And so I decided to do something completely revolutionary and to leave the application, not skip them. Okay, so try to really focus. Actually, I have to say it worked very well, but the important, and I didn't want to apply any negative, any positive discrimination because I didn't want to be accused to lower the standard by hiring women. Okay, I just read the applications. By the way, this fact of lowering the standard by hiring women has been said explicitly in a meeting. So it is not the fact. So the important thing is that instead of being paid as a diversity hero, I discovered that implementing diversity in fact has a cost. And also for the first thing you have an uphill fight in justifying why you select a woman or a woman. So I had this happen to me, to have a colleague and said, look, this is your hire, but why did you select this person? So I just said, look, experience, check. References, check. Academic performance, check. Oh, yes, you're right. Okay. So really, there is a very strong advice. Then, even when a person is hired, it is often the case that women are given, let's say, ancillary tasks inside. If you give a woman a very high level and project, then there are immediately doubts about the fact that she can do it. And even worse, if she performs, I've seen doubts on the project itself. If a male supervisor detects a woman, then of course there is commitment. And what is even worse, if the woman is good looking, because looks are part of the persona, the woman, much more than of men. Then the things become even embarrassing, and of course you have no defense, because I mean it's very sad, but it's there. What you do to a colleague that tells you, aha, I mean, simply pretend you don't hear it. The other thing is that, but I was telling myself, but just the fact that I managed to rebalance gender balance, it should be considered a positive thing itself, given all the hype. But not even this. Because people tell me that focusing on gender balance is not helpful because diversity does not stop at gender. I absolutely agree. But the point is that I think this is disingenuous to do nothing. Because gender bias affects 50% of the time. So I think it's a good place to start. Particularly a term where it is, in Europe, where other forms of diversity are more difficult to address. And as a matter of fact, and also because there's plenty of talented female researchers, so it should be very easy. In fact, I found that working on the unconscious bias, it is possible. But the thing which is even more interesting is that when I wanted to publicize this, and say, why don't we say that? Implement our team, why don't we say that at least it's not a diverse, at least a relative gender balance team. It's very funny because members of my group were even opposed to that, opposed gender. I mean, is it really necessary to quote numbers? Why do we have to show that we're better than the others? Can we just say that we are diverse? Isn't singling out gender diversity a form of sexism? Doesn't that say that we're not affecting other forms of diversity, and so on? So I even risk to get accused of sexism. But in spite of this, I'm very proud to say that our team is now 41% female, very talented people, and I would put it to the system. Thank you.
All right. So perhaps now I will move to the next question. So this is actually a very specific question. I think that in the previous diversity panels that we have seen, we have heard about the pipe leak, the fact that when you start at an early age, you have equal amount of female and male that want to do STEM, and as you go, it goes, okay. Then it decreases 50%, 25, and then 15, like a number that Frederick quoted. But this is a little bit more specific, which is an additional pipe leak, it seems. The question goes with an introduction. From the Fortune 500 survey, only 6.4% of US biggest companies are run by women. Whether gender or age or any criteria, in your view, what are the causes of those promotion discrepancy, also seen in science, especially when we go to the higher level of management? And if I may, perhaps I will start with you, Jennifer, since you have a large experience in leadership, high-level leadership.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. It is one of my passions for sure. If we don't have women leaders, we are not going to have other women moving up. And so, that's one reason. Two, it's the right thing to do. But three, and I think there's a very strong business case if you want to have those statistics. A business or an institution where you are out, seeking grants and funding and collaborating with other groups, when you have women in leadership positions, they are roughly 30% more profitable year after year. They have a 45% increase year over year. So, going back to statistics, and you guys are scientists here, so I know that data points are interesting. I would encourage you to look at some of the reports that are out there and use those. The Fortune 500 companies, there's actually only 4% of women CEOs. I'm just going to hit on some of these points because I think they're they should be shocking even though we know them, right? 14% of U.S. executive roles, only 14% of any C-level executive role in the U.S. is held by a woman. That is, I don't see how we can have any sense of gender diversity if our leadership is, primarily men. Only 12% of non-Fortune 100 corporate boards have women on their seats. So these are all things that we must change at the higher level. How do we do that? So you're right. You have, in general, walking into any position, you have roughly 50-50 male and female entering the workforce. The first thing that starts to happen, and I think our work on trying to change how review processes go and that sort of thing is definitely making a difference in this regard. But women don't get advanced. And once women start not getting advanced at the same rate that their male counterparts are, it slowly continues to go in that direction. So, by the time, and when you think about who's going to lead a company at a C-level, or, and I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know what the equivalent would be, the right title in the scientific world, but if there are a few men making the decisions about promoting, and there was a number point that I had here, and I'm struggling because of the data words, but so I'll just use my own industry terminology. Anybody who's going to move into like a C-level executive position, they get hired out of SVP roles or VP roles, vice president, senior vice presidential roles. If you are not advancing women along the way, they don't even have a shot because they're not in the pool of applicable candidates. So I think one of the more important things that we can do in advancing gender diversity in leadership roles is to start from the very beginning and going back to how are we reviewing our colleagues and making sure that we have processes in place for how we consider merit increases and titles, and let's level those out. Who's making the decisions on titles? What are the criteria by which individuals are being advanced? So that's it's a critical component, and I also think that it's one of the easier things that we can begin to implement.
I'll go back to applying the same rigorous decision-making process across all people processes, and that includes hiring and promotion at senior levels, and being able to rigorously use those processes and communicate them and communicate the outcomes. There is data that says you put more women in place, tend to hire women up at lower levels. There's also research out there that says then there's some blowback for the women who hire more women, or for the African-American male who hires more African-Americans, right? So whatever we can do to even out that decision-making process, no matter who's doing the hiring, to pay attention to what's going to make someone successful in this job, and how are we making sure the person we're naming meets those criteria.
So, perhaps a quick question there on the back, please, because I'd like to also have a diversity of people asking questions. Thank you.
So, one of the things we heard from the line for was that one of the strategies to survive was to kind of escape the American cultural context and seek international collaborators that are maybe not in their context and make it easy to collaborate. We're, of course, a very large scale scientific collaboration with 3,000 people across 40 countries and a different end of the spectrum, where we have the problem that we don't really have that common cultural context to talk about these things. Right? So the overtime, like the overlap of these overtime windows of acceptable political ideas is very small. Right? So, but the problem is that we still need to do a hiring decision inside of these multinational collaborations. And my question is there like a language that, or scientific literature on common and global language that we
I have not seen anything specific to that. I'm not saying it's not out there, but I have not seen that.
But may I suggest again the point of practices versus policies? If yourself you become a hiring manager and you hear about those panels on diversity, you have to do the conscious effort to, of course, review, the pool of candidates on a regular basis and apply yourself those best practices, regardless or not, regardless of whether or not there is a policy, and then the rest will come. It's just one step at a time. You want to have a follow-up, but only if there's a question, please. Yeah, because we are going to run out of time. Yeah? Okay.
So in issue in our field, we work in very large collaboration, and many of the leadership roles require nominations. And men are much more likely than women, for example, to self-nominate or to ask their friends to nominate them. And this is pretty well established. And so it's not that we have hiring managers who identify pools of candidates. We have something nominally coming up. And that question is, how can we address issues like that? Other than telling
Yes. No, we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make sure that women are nominated.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So let's go for the.
Yeah, I was just going to say that going back to training, they do a training every single time they're getting ready to review. I would encourage your team to think about training everybody who's going to go through this process, whether or not they are going to be nominating themselves or not, and then, if this is something that would work, coming up with some procedures around how the nominations work. There are ways to control that, and there are ways to ensure that everyone's voice is being heard.
I would just comment that change starts with all of you. So if you're the people who are doing nominations, then keep that in mind. Take that as a lesson from this meeting. If you know people, it's not the point, but it is where it starts. You have to affect the change in your organization, your collaboration, your cohorts, and the people you work with. You have to set the example.
This is now a little bit outside just purely on diversity realms, because that's my entire lifetime of work. That when the reason people tend to fail in their jobs is because they don't continually learn or they don't manage their relationships well. No matter how smart, what their expertise is, those are the reasons they tend to be removed or level out in their career. The stronger data says women tend to be much better at managing those relationships. But it's not a criteria for naming people to roles. And that's why having defined criteria that's balanced out across both, and you want to look for people who can do both, right? That tends to then open up more possibilities for them just in that.
Yeah, and the point that I was trying to make about my international colleagues is that I wasn't getting the recommendations. I wasn't being nominated by my white male colleagues that I went to graduate school with and the postdoc with, for example. So it was difficult to build that professional network within the cohort that naturally should have been my peers in my discipline. And so I could go outside of that to develop it, and then I found that the international colleagues were willing to nominate, to invite me to be a panelist on a workshop or to their institution for a seminar. Those were things that happened naturally. I couldn't force my colleagues to do that for me. So it's really up, I think, to you who understand that that's the way the system works, to make sure that you're inviting, nominating individuals who are underrepresented.
So we are, before we run out of time, I would like to ask that last question. because I think it's one question that comes a lot, and somehow it has been answered already, but I want to be sure to end with this because so people can answer in a positive fashion. And the question was, when hiring team members for technical projects, would you accord a diversity bonus to be added to the pure technical merit of a candidate? If so, aren't we creating a new kind of bias? Starting with you, Paul.
So I said earlier I have an opinion statement on this one more than no. I don't think you pay people for doing the right thing, right? It's about making the right kinds of decisions. And again, there's data out there that says when you drive people towards quotas or have to do something, that you actually get lower and less than results.
I would second that. Frankly, we've chosen through our DEI plan and everything else to not peg any numbers. And there was so much discussion around percentages of this, or how do we? There are other ways to do it. I wouldn't go on the bonus route.
All right. So any burning question so we can close this session? But of course, do not hesitate to discuss with our panel during the coffee break. It's 30 minutes, now 25 minutes coffee break. Any remaining questions? All right. So let me thank again our panel. So this was a very good discussion, and I hope you will take at heart that diversity starts with you. And in order for us to help you, we will put more material uploaded to the agenda. So please consult it after the conference. Thank you.